and welcome back to my channel. My name is Erica. Today I'm going to be showing you how to make this super fun mug rug. This is going to be a quilt as you go tutorial. I am using this Prairie Sisters line by Poppy Cotton. As you can see, the colors are super fun and beautiful. So this project is going to be 5.5 by 10.5 inches finished. I wanted to have a space for my mug and then a little area over here for maybe a little snack or something. But if you'd like to make these just a more traditional coaster size, just make a 5.5 by 5.5 or 6 by 6 inch square, and you can do the quilt as you go method, or you can just do a solid piece of fabric. This is a super fun and easy project and a great way to use up your scraps. Let's go ahead and get started. Supplies for this project are really easy. You're going to need a little bit of leftover quilt batting. I just use my scraps. You will need a couple of larger pieces of fabric. This one is 5.5 by 5.5. This one is 5.5 by 10.5. This will be our backing for our project. And then I wanted one of my sides to be a solid piece. If you don't want one side to be a solid piece, you can just use scraps. And then of course you'll need a bunch of fun little scraps. It's helpful to have an acrylic ruler, your rotary trimmer, and then I just grabbed one of our mugs. This one says, "Always stay humble and kind." It's one of my favorites. And I just have that just to make sure that it's going to fit on my little mat that I'm making here. All right, I think that's it for supplies. You'll also need a sewing machine, but other than that, we're good to go. Let's get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is take some of my 505 basting spray, and I'm sorry I forgot to say this in the supplies. I always forget it. I'm going to take my piece of backing and just lay it on one of my little pieces of batting here. And I'm just putting a little bit in the middle, trying not to get a whole lot of overspray. We just need this to stay in place while we're quilting. So just a little bit. Good to go. And then I'm going to go ahead and just trim around this just so that I know where my edges are while we're quilting on the other side. So I have trimmed this whole piece down to 5.5 by 10.5. You can of course make yours any size that you would like. The next thing I'm going to do is just take my ruler and I'm going to mark this at 5.25 inches. You could also do 5, it doesn't really matter. You just want to make sure you're going far enough over with your scrappy section that when you go to add your larger piece, it will overlap by 1/4 inch. All right, now we're going to take this over to the sewing machine, and I'm just going to start adding my quilt as you go scraps on this side, and then when we're done, we'll add our larger piece to cover this side. So I've just got one of my scraps here, and I just kind of basically placed it in the middle. I'm not really measuring anything, and I'm just going to run a couple straight stitches down here to secure this. Now that our first piece is secured, we're going to go ahead and just grab a second piece. I've got this yellow one right here. Obviously it's too long, so I'm just going to place it on here and then kind of eyeball it and just trim it off. I'm not really measuring, just kind of winging it here. All right, that's about the right length. Now I'm going to place these two right sides together, lining up this edge, and I'm just going to sew 1/4 inch down this edge right here to secure it. And then I'm just going to finger press this open. You could take it over to your ironing board as well. I don't see any need to. I'm not going to worry about it. Oh, and we got lucky. This one went all the way to the edge, so there you go. And now I'm just going to run some stitches down this one as well. All right, and I'm just going to keep adding new strips in that same manner as I go. This one is obviously way too big, so we'll cut that down. I decided I want these little chickens on here, so I'm just gonna sew them onto this one, make myself a little bit of a longer piece. And I'll just press that open, and then we can add them right here. This one's a little bit long, so I'll trim that off. All right, so this side is mostly covered. I'm gonna go ahead and get my larger piece now and just line it up right on that edge there. And we will add that piece. All right, we're done with our panel and it's already quilted onto the backing, so we're good there. We just need to add some binding, but first we're just gonna trim this up. So I set this at about 5.5 by 10.5. But if you have any pieces of batting that are still showing, you can really just cut those off. It doesn't matter. Just make sure it's all nice and squared up and you should be good to go. All right, so it's all nice and trimmed up, and the next thing we need to do is make the binding for this. So you can either use your scraps. I like to make my binding at 2.5 inches for my big quilts. Sometimes I'll go down to 2.25 for these smaller projects, but you can use whatever size binding you feel comfortable with. So you can either use up your scraps for your binding, or you can cut a special piece for your binding. So I just cut a couple of strips from a fat quarter I have. I'm going to place those right sides together, and then I'm just going to sew them together right here using a 1/4 inch strip, and then I'm going to press them like this. I'll show you after I press. All right, so I just sewed these two pieces together and I pressed them open, and then all I did was take this over to my ironing board and just press this whole thing in half lengthwise this way. And then let's head over to the sewing machine and I'll show you how to add it to our mug rug. All right, so I'm going to start on one of our longer edges because that will be easier. And I'm going to go ahead and lay my binding down. I'm lining up the raw edges of my binding with the raw edges of my project. And then I'm going to scoot clear down here, and I'm going to start attaching my binding using a 1/4 inch. Now I'm going to stop when I'm a 1/4 inch away from this edge right here, and I can just kind of feel it, so I'm eyeballing it. Lift up your presser foot, diagonal about 45 degrees, and then I'm going to do a little back stitch and cut my thread. Now we're going to turn this whole project to the side. I'm going to place my finger right here and just pull this binding straight up so that now it's in line with this right edge over here. And I'm just going to kind of finger press that a little bit, and then I'm going to pull it down towards myself so that these raw edges are lined up, and you'll have this little kind of flap here. Leave that flap down, and we're just going to start sewing right from this edge. We're going to repeat this process on all 4 corners. So again, pull it out. So we're going to just pull our binding again straight up and then straight back towards ourselves. And again, keep going on this corner. We're going to do that on all 4 corners. As you can see, that was our last corner, and I just sewed a little bit here. Now we're going to take this back over to our cutting board, and I'll show you how to line up the edges. So here's our starting spot, and here was our extra flap. I've just lined these up so they overlap by 1/4 inch and trimmed this off. I eyeball it, but you can of course measure it. And now that they're overlapping by 1/4 inch, we're just going to lay them together so that they're flat. You don't want any pieces twisting, and then open them up like this. And then we're going to take this over to the sewing machine and lining these edges up, so 1/4 inch down this edge. Now because this is kind of a small piece, I find it easier to kind of fold it in half. You can also pin these pieces in place. All right, and then we can just open this up and it should lay nice and flat there. And then I'm just going to fingerprint press this seam open and then fold it in half and just kind of press it again. And now we can go ahead and finish attaching that to our coaster. All right, so it's all attached to one side. The next thing to do is flip it over and attach it to the back side, and you can hand bind if you like, or you can machine bind, which is what we're going to do today. So I just pulled it so it's nice and snug on the other side, and you can kind of feel where the other side of the binding is on here. So you just want to run a stitch right along the inside of that and right on the outside edge of this backside binding to secure it to the front. Now when we get to this first corner, I find it easiest on these small projects to just let this lay all the way down and then carefully fold that corner up, and then just do your best to make these line up. And I just take one stitch into this one, and then I'm going to lift up my presser foot, turn it with the needle still in the down position, lower my presser foot, and then we'll just keep on going. All right guys, as you can see, that was a super fast and easy project. I hope you enjoyed this one. I'm trying to do a little bit more of these kind of quilt as you go tutorials because I think they're a great way to use up your scraps, and who doesn't want to have a fun, cute mug rug? I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, please make sure to thumbs up and subscribe. That way I know to keep making fun tutorials for you. Thanks so much for joining me, and I will see you next time.